Today's video, guys, we're going to learn how to easily pattern deer. This is something I've been doing for a very long time. There's some basic things in here, but there's also some advanced ways that we can do this to easily pattern deer. Now, first things first, patterning a deer, there's a lot of things that go into it because that pattern of that deer's movement and travel throughout the property is going to change basically from season to season. It could be month to month and week to week. It's going to be dependent on food sources and where that deer is actually bedding. Now, a lot of times, we're working with, say, 20 acres, 15 acres, 40 acres, 60 acres that we have permission to hunt on. So we can only focus on what we have permission to hunt on, those 60 acres or those 40 acres. Now, what I do is, I take cell cameras or even regular cameras. I like the cell cams reveals because it allows me to take real-time data on my phone, so I don't have to go in there into that property to actually check the cameras. Now, what I do is I scout that entire piece of property. I find out what my property has to offer food-wise. It could be a regeneration area where there was a clear cut or select cut and you have a lot of woody browse coming up, for fall food. It could be that you have permission and you actually are planting, legitimate food plots on your area, right? So I find that specific food source for that kind of year that it is, whether they have an acorn drop or, like I said, food plot, natural browse, regeneration area, fruit treat, whatever it is. I find that on that property. Next, you find the bedding areas, if they're even bedding on your property. They may not be bedding. Now, if they aren't, then we can kind of create those bedding areas on a certain property and make it a little bit easier to pattern these deer. So once I establish that food source, and dependent if they have that bedding area, what I like to do is I like to take these cell cams. I'll find the trails that's going from that bedding to food, okay, on my property, because that's all we can control. So there may be a trail that comes from a bedding area, then it kind of splits off into maybe 3-4 different trails, right? So sometimes I will take a trail camera and I may place it on each one of those intersecting trails that veer off of the main trail, whether that's around a pinch point or something like a pinch point that we can make, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But I'll take a cell cam, and place it on each one of those trails that veer off of the main trail, because each one of those trails are going to go somewhere. So you have to determine at that time of year, what that buck, specifically if you're hunting a buck, which trail is he taking and where is he going. So you use that intel on your cell cam to figure that out. And a lot of times too is if I don't get a picture on a trail within a day or two or 3 days, maybe 4 days, and it's not consistent, it's not a good trail. They're not using it on a regular basis. So then I need to determine, what do I need to do to increase the activity on this trail? Is it just because it's a specific time of year where they're only using it in the fall or late into the winter, or is it something they're using early season because of the food changes, maybe ag getting cut, food plots coming in, whatever it is? So I'll move my camera maybe off to a different side of the farm on another intersecting trail. But you have to put these cameras on intersecting trails from bedding to feeding in order to pattern these deer. And if something's not consistent within 2, 3, 4 days, it's not a good trail. You have to move your camera. You have to do something different. You have to ask yourself, why aren't the deer using it? And walk that deer trail, see exactly where it goes, because that's going to give you more intel. Now, let's say it is a heavily used area. My app's blowing up on pictures and it's pretty regular on a specific buck, but then you have to figure out, well, how can I hunt this trail? How can I get into this area and hunt this trail to be able to have a chance of shooting this deer? We already put in the work, we've patterned the buck. How do I get in there? Well, a lot of times if it's private property, what I like to do is we can actually cut trees, right, and block off a certain area and push them off to the side to maybe a pinch point that's a little bit easier to hunt. We can set a stand, we can get around the backside, walk around the property edge, whatever it is, to be able to get to that. Now, if you can't hunt that specific area where this intersection of movement is, then we have to find a different spot, right? Because a lot of times you get into this area, if you can't access it well, if it's close to bedding, close to food, you're going to end up spooking them out. So we may have to transition to a different side of the farm and figure out exactly where the deer are on that side of the farm. And we can do some habitat improvements to entice them to use certain areas. You know, we can hinge cut that area, you know, make a travel corridor by hinge cutting some trees, opening up the area. You know, I'd take a lot of times, I'll spray the ground with glyphosate with a backpack sprayer to open those trails up. Just entices the deer to use them actually a little bit more. So there's a lot of ways we can actually maneuver, you know, make the deer maneuver around our property the way we want. But it starts by patterning the deer, seeing where there's a consistent movement, and finding those intersecting trails from bedding to feeding, setting up cameras on each one of those trails, and determine which one is being used more often. Figure that out, then we can learn how to actually hunt that spot. If we can't hunt that spot, we have to move the cameras back to figure out another area that we can get into a little bit easier. So using these cell cams is very beneficial, real-time information. And I've been using this for years. You know, years ago we didn't have cell cams, we didn't have trail cams, so you kind of had to, you know, wing it. You find, you know, intersecting trails that come from one and veer off, or come from a bunch of fingers down into one trail that leads out. That's going to be obviously a hot spot because you have all those fingers of trails coming into one. That's going to be a giant deer movement, because all those deer could be coming, if each one of those trails goes somewhere, it could be leading off of off your property. They're coming onto this trail, going down into the main trail. You could have other trails coming from your property that go down into this, so you have a lot of deer meeting in that middle, going into that one. And we can, like I said, we can enhance this by cutting some trees, blocking off certain trails, enticing those deer to use a specific one that we need them to use in order to get a beautiful bow shot. For more tips and trick, guys, and learn how to become a better food plotter and land manager, give this video a watch right here.